Everyone, and welcome to today's virtual event, Litigating for Climate and Energy Justice. My name is Megan Watson, Senior Associate Director of Alumni Relations, and we're so glad you've joined us today. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few upcoming alumni events. Our upcoming Meet the Dean event will take place in San Francisco and in Palo Alto with Dean Chilton and Professor Hubbard on May 27th and 28th. If you're tuning in from the West Coast today, we would love to see you there. We'll also be hosting a virtual Supreme Court review and preview on June 2nd, featuring Professors William Bode, Aziz Huck, and David Strauss. Keep an eye out on your inbox for that invitation that will be sent very soon. You can find more information about these and other events on the law school website in the alumni section. I'm now pleased to share a few words about the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic. The clinic works to address some of the most pressing environmental challenges facing Chicago, Illinois, and the Great Lakes region. It works. It includes challenging illegal pollution, advocating for stronger permits and regulations, holding environmental agencies accountable, and developing innovative environmental solutions. Through their participation, students gain hands-on experience in environmental law and litigation. The clinic is directed by Mark Templeton, clinical professor of law, director of the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic, a member of the Committee on Environment, Geography, and Urbanization, and a research affiliate of the Energy Policy Institute of Chicago. Prior to joining the law school, Professor Templeton served as trustee and is executive director of the Office of Independent Trustees of the $20 billion Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill Trust. He also served as director of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, where he led statewide efforts in energy, environmental protection, state parks, and water resources. I'll now turn the program over to Dean Chilton and Professor Templeton.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks for everyone for being here today. Now, right now, two of our university's main strategic priorities are trying to be a leader in generative AI and incorporating that into legal education and education more broadly and into research. And then also sustainable growth and climate change, which is a major priority right now for the University of Chicago. Now, Mark Templeton and our Abrams Environmental Law Clinic is engaged in both of these strategic efforts. And earlier this year, you've heard me talk about some of these prior Dean's dialogues about what we're doing around generative AI, but I thought I'd have Mark on to talk to us about some of the things we're doing on climate change. Now, the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic, which Mark directs, was founded in 2012 with the generous support of Jim and Wendy Abrams. Jim and Wendy are the co-founders, and Wendy's the CEO of the 1111 Foundation, which is dedicated to driving action on climate change for a sustainable future. One of their core projects has been helping to fund the work of the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic. Now, so Mark, I want to talk to you about two main topics today, which are at the overlapping circles for you, which the first is the substantive work that you do in environmental and energy spaces. And then the second is your pedagogical approach to teaching law students to be leaders in environmental law going forward. Now, I want to start, though, with the substantive work itself and what it is that you're doing as part of the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic. So since our title is Litigating for Climate and Energy Justice, I know that you do a lot of time doing exactly that. So can you tell us about the work you've been doing? And to start, I thought maybe we could start on your work with utilities.
Yeah, Adam, thanks so much for having me here. And I also want to thank Jim and Wendy Abrams, who started the Abrams Clinic almost 15 years ago and have given me an amazing platform to do this work with so many students over time. So we do a lot of different work in terms of climate, and I'm sure we'll get to all of it, but I wanted to do is kind of start with some of the work we do on electric and gas utility issues. Part of this comes from my own background. So I was a state regulator. So I did not oversee the utilities directly, but I worked closely with the Public Service Commission and the chair of the Public Service Commission in Missouri on various issues kind of related to energy generation, transmission and distribution, renewable energy, et cetera. And so I think I bring kind of a state perspective to these issues. And I really see that's kind of as where the rubber hits the road, right? So obviously we have huge federal policy, huge tax incentives at different points in time for clean energy, grid deployment, et cetera, et cetera. But day to day, it is really the utilities, the electric utilities and the gas utilities that are investing billions of dollars hundreds of billions of dollars every year in our states. And what they invest that money in has actually a huge impact on the environment and the clean energy transition. Another reason we kind of do this work before public utility commissions, and maybe I should explain a little bit, public utility commissions are the ones that regulate the rates and approve the activities of these enterprises, right? So they are called public utilities. They are private enterprises, right, with shareholders that earn a rate of return on their investments, but they are given monopolies and certain rights that kind of come with that, eminent domain in certain contexts. And so in exchange for that, basically the states have public utility commissions, public service commissions that set rates and terms of service, quality of service. Companies are going before, the utilities are going before the public service commissions multiple times a year on various different issues. So for example, we do a lot of work in Michigan. Two main utilities there, DTE and consumers. And for each of the past 5 years, roughly, they've each brought an electric rate case where they ask for an increase in rates. And then a number of different groups can kind of intervene. We represent energy justice organizations based in environmental justice communities. But a lot of and some of that, what we advocate for is particular to the interests of those communities. But we're also advocating for kind of renewable energy more generally. And so one of the reasons I like these cases is that they're repeat player games, right? I think often in litigation, it's kind of one and done. There's a particular event that happened. You're working really hard kind of on that particular case. And then often you're kind of done with it. With these, there's essentially multiple cases a year. And so that gives us an opportunity over time to really build a lot of expertise and bench strength and knowledge that we can kind of bring to bear in case to case, which also gives students a lot of opportunities and experience.
Got it. Just so I'm clear and we're all clear on the structure, there's utility companies that exist. So in Chicago, it's ComEd, right?
Correct.
That provides the power that goes to all of our houses and to the law school building or wherever else. And to generate that power, they operate whatever it is. I don't really know. Coal plants, natural gas plants, a nuclear plant, wind farm, solar farms, whatever, some collection of power plants that operate in different ways. They're regulated by a utility commission since they have the monopoly to provide the power to our homes or to our businesses. And then you and your clinic are intervening at that level in front of the utility commission when those utility companies are trying to change their rates or make arguments about the balance of the kinds of how much they're going to do through natural gas, coal, wind, whatever, something like this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Michigan is a little bit more like what you described. Illinois is a little bit different, where there's a separation between the company that actually owns the wires that brings the power to the law school and to your home compared to the generation company. But again, this is actually one of the things that I think is great about this work is because, I come from a business background, which maybe makes me a little bit unusual for clinicians, or at least environmental clinicians. But
probably, yeah.
I'm probably the only one in the country that's been a banker or a management consultant. But I think it's really important to understand how an industry works, kind of when you're engaging with it, to understand what are its incentives, and obviously not just the profit incentive, but what is it trying to achieve? How is it trying to achieve it? And so I think that we're kind of playing a multi-level game, right? We're in the individual proceeding. What is the company trying to seek approval for? How are they trying to raise their rates? What kind of investments are they trying to make? But this is part of a broader strategic plan for the company, and they also fit into the broader kind of utility space. So again, part of the reason I think this is kind of great pedagogically for students is you have to operate at multiple levels at one time.
Got it. Okay. I've got two questions coming out of what we've said so far. One is, I know that you do a reasonable amount of your work on this specific topic that we started on, this utilities work in Michigan. Why is that? And then secondly is, how is it that the work that you're doing there has an impact on either environmental justice or on potentially then impacting climate change?
Great. So we do the work in Michigan. To make a long story short, we were very fortunate to receive some support from the Joyce Foundation in 2014. And as kind of the original purpose of the grant kind of changed over time, they encouraged us to work in a couple of different states. So Illinois and another Great Lakes state. The Joyce Foundation funds in Great Lakes states. And Michigan seemed like a natural place to work because in 2016, both Illinois and Michigan passed significant energy legislation. We got connected with a person who was the environmental justice coordinator at the Wayne State Clinic and the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center. And the people, we met some great clients in Detroit and then later in Grand Rapids. And Michigan has just been a good place to do the work because the clients are really great, very committed, dedicated, thoughtful, systematic thinkers. I can't speak to every other bar, but the energy bar in Michigan is probably 50 or 60 attorneys. We all see each other in case after case after case. So there's again a repeat player element to it, and the administrative law judges and the various attorneys have been supportive of our students doing cross examinations and kind of taking a leading role in the cases. And so it's been a good environment, and we've basically just kind of gone deep in Michigan. It's also a really, significant state, big industrial capacity, and so it's a nice kind of microcosm for thinking about kind of energy issues more generally in the country.
What's Michigan's power grid like?
Um,
Like,
so can you say a little bit more what
no,
you
I
mean
just mean,
by
is
that?
it like got a lot of coal, renewable? Is it like a leader in this area?
Yeah, it's great. It's. I mean, in that sense, again, as Michigan goes, so goes the country, right? When we started the work, some of the largest coal-fired power plants in Michigan were operating. One of the successes that we have had is to help to shut down some of those coal-fired power plants ahead of schedule, which has brought in coalition with others, because there are multiple interveners in these cases. So I want to share the credit. But for example, the second most polluting power plant in the country was shut down 3 years ahead of schedule. Public health benefits, it's $1 billion a year of reduced cases of asthma, heart attacks, in terms of hospital room visits, days lost to work. So $3 billion of public health benefits by shutting the plant down 3 years earlier. And that's not even counting the climate change benefits. So if you were to actually kind of multiply the tons of CO2 times the cost of that, we would be well north of that amount of money. And so, Michigan is transitioning from coal-fired generation. Kind of the question is to what, right? There's requirements for the utilities to invest in renewables. There are requirements for the utilities to open up essentially the grid to third parties that want to construct and operate renewable energy facilities. There's also a question about kind of gas, right? I think what you also kind of mentioned as well. And so again, it's a great microcosm for how is the country kind of going to change. It also is the home of one of the coal-fired power plants called the Campbell plant that was days, maybe 2 weeks away from being shuttered. But because of some of the executive orders and actions from this administration, basically has been told to continue to operate, even though kind of literally they were down to some of the last days of coal, and people were in the process of being, transitioned out of working there and things like that. So again, I think Michigan's a great place to do this work. Although honestly, I would love to do it everywhere. I think there's such a need. No, you smile. We've talked about how in many states there are opportunities to bring in more community voices. So I think again, many people are not familiar with public utility commissions, but it is like the hot area in environmental and energy law. Organizations like Natural Resources Defense Council, Earth Justice, Sierra Club, kind of at the national level, state organizations, more and more of the green organizations are getting in, again, because they realize this is where decisions that relate to a lot of carbon pollution, um, mercury, you kind of name it. It's really important. And maybe one last point, when these decisions are made, these are long-lived assets. So if a company says we want to build a new gas plant, right, decades, right, that the money would be kind of invested in the gas plant. So we're kind of living with these decisions for a long period of time. So if you support climate change, if you support renewables as a way to address climate change, you really want to be in these cases right now when the decisions are being made that are going to have impacts for decades.
Yeah. So, I mean, first off, on the just sort of the health and the climate piece, the ROI on you and your students' work just seems incredible. And that if you take, as you said, the health benefits and then like the climate change, carbon impact benefits, if you're able to just accelerate the timeline of transitioning away to coal just a little bit faster, I can believe those numbers can be relatively small in the grand scheme of things, investment in you and your students and your work for these, multi-billion-dollar impacts. Here's my question though. One of the things that you're concerned about is both the like transitioning away to carbon, but then also something like uh, energy justice. And by that, I mean, I don't know the right phrase to use here, but I believe that you've also been concerned about what the rates are for like low income people in Michigan and the other states that you work in and making sure that they can afford their energy bills.
Yeah.
How are those things not in just deep tension, right? You take a plant offline, all of a sudden the rates must go up. How do you think about the tension between these two goals that you've been pursuing?
Sure, it's a great question. There are no silver bullets and there are trade-offs. Again, that's why I think this is great for students because it's easy. Not that you Chicago law students are in the streets marching, although maybe they should be about climate change. But it's a great opportunity to kind of think through how complicated these issues are, and particularly in a transition period. So I think we think about this as a three-legged stool. One leg is the clean energy transition. I mean, really kind of investments in renewables. Another key part of that is having a reliable grid because not all, but a fair amount of the clean energy transition turns on is the grid up to date, hardened enough so that you could have rooftop solar, you can have electric vehicles, right? That requires more from the distribution system than's been required in the past. So you need a more reliable system. And again, more money associated with that. So I'm just kind of doubling down, I guess, on your premise,
Yeah.
and then the affordability piece as well. So I think there are a couple of thoughts. I mean, one thing that we do just generally is when the utility asks for $400 or $500 million of increases, we just do kind of good analysis of are these really good expenses? Is there going to be are they padded? Are they necessary, et cetera? So almost kind of just a good governance kind of
Yeah.
function that we're able to help with. I think another piece that we think about, and maybe I'll speak about the reliability piece, is good money being thrown after bad? Meaning sometimes you could upgrade the grid with a quick solution that may be in the short term less expensive, but what you really need to do is actually, again, it's more costly in a sense, but you have a longer term investment that's more expensive if it's going to have longer term payoff. So again, you can basically throw a band-aid on, or you can solve the kind of reliability problem. If you throw a band-aid on, you're going to keep throwing band-aids on over and over again. You're not going to kind of deal with the fundamental issues, and it's also more expensive over time to kind of keep throwing the band-aids on. On the power generation piece, it's actually cheaper to use renewables and storage than, I mean, nobody's building a new coal-fired power plant for a whole variety of reasons. Gas is a little bit more complicated because we've got questions about the surge in demand for AI data centers, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. And I think the other thing we're basically kind of pointing out is that right now the existing assistance programs are insufficient. So, for example, we put in a testimony that says that basically 500,000 DTE customers, so think of kind of the lower third of the peninsula around the thumb, are not able to afford their rates currently, which is a little less than 30%. Companies been asking for an increase, would make unaffordable for a third of ratepayers. So we're basically saying there needs to be new thinking about these assistance programs so that people actually can get the support that they need to actually cover these kinds of investments. So it's complicated, right? It's a trade-off in terms of time and money and yeah, I don't.
Yeah. No, actually, so
This is big. This is going to require a lot of money. I don't disagree at
yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah. No, so your answer there hit on actually two things that are like core themes in law and economics. The first is like some of Dick Posner's earliest work was to point out the sort of tension in utilities regulations, which is so you have this company with a natural monopoly, and then they basically go to this regulator to get permission to pass on their costs. And so they say, we spent $10 billion on a new plant, therefore we need to up the rates that everyone pays to offset this. And you have this just core problem that the regulator can easily get captured and be responsive to the entity that they're regulating and then just pass off costs. And then it just eliminates all incentives for careful governance, right? Like you're better off if you spend more building. In fact, one of the things that's been particularly egregious and has been well documented is more tort liability can equal more profit because you say, oh, we lost all of these cases. Now we've got to pass on the expenses so we can stay in business. Everyone's rates have to go up. So the incentives to avoid negligent behavior or um, uh, environmental forest fires in California or coal spills in North Carolina is really weakened in this environment. And then the second thing that you gotta, it's like the core idea in law and economics is set the policy right and then worry is redistribution is a different problem. And so if the policy is to reduce, coal-fired plants, even if it makes it more expensive, we can separately worry about the energy assistance programs or whatever else to make sure that that you're not being too regressive in the way that you do these things. But it would be a shame to have, say, for equity reasons, that we have to all have more coal plants than we actually need, or something like that.
And again, I don't. This is the third, internalizing the externalities, right? I mean, so again, you want to be sure. I mean, particularly in a situation like this, which I really emphasize, is like it's a regulated monopoly, right? So you actually can really think about how you would, internalize these externalities, right, in a way that may be more complicated. If you're talking about kind of environmental laws, kind of more generally, you can actually do a fair amount of that specifically here. I mean, I think another example that we've been involved in here is these utilities. It's often true. People are getting both gas and electricity. And to have the clean energy transition, we need to be kind of electrifying as quickly as possible. Yet, of course, the gas companies have a lot of investments in their existing lines. In one of these cases, for DTE Energy, who we're working on, they have both an electric company and a gas company. Now, the service territories are not 100%, but there's enough overlap that we argue they really need to be planning together. Because if you, based on my reading, if you read what the electricity company says, everybody's going to electrify. We need to build all of these plants. And the gas company says, people aren't really going to electrify. We need to continue to invest in these pipes. These two things, I mean, sure, there's uncertainty, but these two things can't be true in the same way, to the extent that they're both saying that. And so, again, this is where I feel like a regulator can step in and say, hey, there needs to be better planning here because this transition is happening. We can argue about kind of the pace and things like that. But given that we're moving that direction, we shouldn't be investing any more in the legacy gas system than we need to. Again, so back to affordability. It's not just what people are paying for gas or electricity, it's what they're paying for energy in total. And a regulator can come in and say, okay, let's look across the whole I as an individual have a percentage of my income that is going to energy, right? Some to electricity, some to gas. Let's try to make sure that those are working, as efficiently and, least cost, I guess, as possible.
Got it. Okay. So, in addition to your work on this utilities piece that we've been talking about so far, I know that your clinic has filed a number of amicus briefs recently in some major litigation related to national public policy issues that relate to climate change and environmental issues. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yes. So in January, we filed a brief on behalf of John Podesta and a number of former cabinet level officials across Democratic and Republican administrations in the Ninth Circuit case Lighthizer v. Trump. So this was a case that's been brought, it's one of the kind of children's climate cases. So maybe the most famous one is kind of the Juliana case. But Our Children's Trust, led by Julia Olson and her team, are representing a number of youth and challenging 3 executive orders of the Trump administration. These are some of the first executive orders that deal with the kind of unleashing American energy dominance, related to kind of keeping coal-fired power plants open, and kind of other leading to the EPA trying to rescind the endangerment finding that finds greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare. So again, challenging 3 executive orders of the Trump administration and basically, saying that they were illegal, unconstitutional, et cetera. And so, how did we end up with this amicus brief? The district court, right? So one of the key issues in every case, I guess, particularly in environmental cases, is standing. Right, so you need to show that there was an injury, caused by the entity the case is against, right, and that when the court acts, the court can redress, right, the injury. In this case, the district court said, yes, there's an injury. Yes, you're basically suing the right person or entity here, but said that there was not redressability, and basically said, it's too hard for a district court to police the thousands of different possible policy actions that are taking place as a result of these executive orders. So our amicus brief, on behalf of former government officials, said, we're a bunch of senior former government officials, including the White House Chief of Staff and the 2 EPA administrators, and Department of Interior Secretary, and et cetera. We actually know how to implement executive orders, and we know how to stop implementing executive orders when courts tell us to stop implementing these executive orders. And so we basically went through and documented a number of cases where across types of administrations, Obama administration, Biden administration, George W. Bush administration, first Trump administration, where those presidents had issued executive orders, and then a court enjoined those orders, and then the government officials changed what they were doing as a result kind of that, to prove basically that, again, if the court issued the injunction that Lighthizer and the other plaintiffs wanted, again, the executive office officials know how to implement that. And if they don't, it's the plaintiff's job to actually bring a case back to the court, or to actually follow up with the court about this. It's not like the court has to be getting daily reports. What's every nook and cranny of the federal government doing? No, the plaintiffs would kind of basically say, these actions are violating the injunction. So that's why we did that case, and it gave students kind of very different experience drafting, right? So appellate court, amicus brief, you're trying to deliver a small amount of material very clearly. Needs to fit within the broader set of other, obviously the lead brief, but the other amicus briefs. limited number of words. I think we had 6,500 words, 7,000 words, I think, in the Ninth Circuit. Our Michigan energy briefs, they're 140 pages because we're tackling so many different kinds of issues. So it's a very different kind of technical writing. And so again, there were students who kind of worked on both of these projects, got to take on big climate issues. One's kind of really high level federal action. The other is kind of, industry level state action. And so I think it was, again, a great experience for students to kind of work on both of those.
Got it. Right. No, it's cool that you've got some of the same students at the same time in your clinic that are filing a brief in the Ninth Circuit on behalf of a bunch of, high level government officials. And then separately in Michigan, writing 144 pages about rate regulation in front of a utility commission and seeing what actually, the kind of litigation you have to do to have an impact is not just all chasing the highest profile thing or something like that.
Yeah, I think one other thing I would say is, what you see is that an administration basically promulgates various policies and rules because of the rulemaking process, right? They've notice and comment. They have to kind of go through a process of promulgating new rules. So we're actually going to be probably doing more of this work, working with some of the big green organizations, but others as well. So for example, a few years ago, we actually represented our colleague, Michael Greenstone, who's a professor in the economics department and the faculty director of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Growth. So he's very well known for being one of the leaders in the social cost of carbon effort. So in true economics U Chicago fashion, let's put a price on carbon emissions so that we understand what's the correct level to regulate and how much we spend on regulation, how much is too much money to spend on regulation. And a few years ago, when President Trump was in power in the first administration, issued a number of kind of decisions related to federal coal leasing, related to coal-fired power plant regulation or vehicles regulation, where either they weren't considering the social cost of carbon at all, and coming to a bad decision because they weren't kind of weighing the costs and the benefits and not using the best available science. Or when they used it, they weren't using it correctly in terms of looking just at the domestic rather than the whole impact of carbon, using a inappropriate discount rate, et cetera. So there's some really important climate cases coming down the road. We've worked with Michael in the past, again, kind of pushing the U Chicago economics rational approach to regulation. And I think we're highly likely to kind of do more of that in the next couple of years as well.
All right. So I said at the start that I wanted to ask you about your substantive work and then also your sort of educational mission as a clinic. And I know we've only talked about sort of two lines of your work, even though there's a whole bunch of other cases that are currently ongoing and that you've done over the last 14 years too. But to switch gears slightly, could you tell us about how you think about picking cases and how that relates into your philosophy of your educational philosophy of running the clinic?
Great. So I think it was a multi-factor test. Number one, are we going to have an impact on public health or the environment? There are too many big opportunities, challenges for us not to take on kind of the biggest, knottiest problems. And again, it may be like, I think $1 billion of public health impact in Michigan is, not small, but then you multiply that across a lot of states, right? It's a huge amount of kind of money in these cases. So impact on public health and the environment. A second is student interest. Now, fortunately, students are interested in climate and environmental justice, and they're interested in the Endangered Species Act. So that's really not an issue, but obviously it's a free market for student talent. And so you want to offer them opportunities where they're going to work on something substantively that they're interested in and build skills as well. Ultimately, of course, I need to be interested in it and my colleagues, because these cases run, aside from some of the Michigan energy ones, these other cases run 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that they're going to be good and interesting and impactful kind of along the way. And I think a last important point is that clients need to be not just willing, but excited to work with students. I've worked with a lot of different clients over time. People sometimes ask me, why do you end up with working now with a lot of the same clients over the past few years? And first of all, I'm always open to looking at new projects, new areas, new clients, etc. But to me, I believe, and I think you do Chicago Law School, we really believe in putting students in role, which means having them lead, which means that when there's a client meeting, they're running the meeting. When the client asks for their perspective on an issue, they're the ones offering it, right? We're there to prep them and as a safety net in these meetings and things like that. So you have to have clients who want to hear from the students and believe that they are well prepared and are not just going to sit and listen to a client and then turn to me, right? And so again, that's why client kind of selection is really important for me. So again, maybe just to answer kind of I sort of mentioned the kind of learning by doing piece by putting students in role. That's a big part of the philosophy here. Kind of maybe similar to something else I've mentioned a little bit, which is I think we believe at least in my clinic, and I think across all the clinics, in high student responsibility, high complexity of cases. So like you, Adam, I was a management consultant at one point. I default to thinking in 2x2s when I can, right? What's the level of student responsibility? What's the degree of complexity, right? I think a lot of clinics in many other law schools may have high student responsibility, low stakes cases. They may have high stakes cases, low student responsibility, right? We want to be in that upper right quadrant, which is high student responsibility, high complexity. And so that's a big part of my philosophy as well, which I also think, Frank, again, students are more interested in that. It better prepares them to actually practice in the real world. Maybe my last point, and it's just a particular UChicago point, or it's consistent with it. I have a big tent philosophy. I want every student who has the slightest interest to get involved in our work in some way. They may be going to go work at NRDC or Earth Justice, and that is great. I love working with those students. They may be going to work at a big law firm, litigating on behalf of big corporations or doing transactions. That's great too. I mean, I had experience working at a large firms kind of before coming to doing other things in public interest, et cetera. And I know how important it is to be a good advisor at one of these firms. And so, and also, people may go into government, or people may not do environment at all. What can they do though? Maybe they offer pro bono work for the local land trust. Maybe they serve on the local forest preserve board. There are a bunch of things that people can do to support these issues using their professional skills. And so I kind of want to open up all of these things to them. And that's why I believe that, you need to have a lot of different approaches and orientations to tackling these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you've touched on a little that I think is particularly cool about your clinic is that you seem eager to scale your impact both on, working in more states, more projects, more things where you think you can have an environmental impact, but then also eager to scale the number of students and people that you're teaching. And so, for instance, Mark's clinic is a little unique in that he has a number of fellows that work with him, and then he has more students than I think our normal clinic as a result of being able to sort of scale this impact, which means more people working on different projects at the same time. And actually, let me just briefly, instead of speaking for you, say something on the role of the fellows and how you've got this model all to work.
Sure. So actually, again, I want to thank Jim and Wendy. So I started the clinic, and it was just me and 4 students. And then I think the next year we were 8 students. And then there was much more demand and interest and opportunity to do this work. I had a good conversation with Jim and Wendy, who said, how can we start to scale the clinic? And so I added a fellow who had worked at Earth Justice, who joined me for a couple of years. He's now at the Environmental Law and Policy Center, kind of the big Midwest litigating NGO. After that, added a person who was a fellow who then came onto the clinical track, who then, fortunately, unfortunately, fortunately for him, maybe a loss for us, got hired away to Northwestern's law school to basically be my counterpart at Northwestern. And he'd come from private practice as a background. And then a person who'd been a kind of civil rights lawyer who was actually really helpful for our environmental justice work, practiced at a plaintiff side firm, Lovey and Lovey here, came. A couple great people I have working with me right now, Jake Schuhart, who was in private practice on the environmental bar for about 3-4 years before coming to join me, and then recently joined by Alexandria Mishko, who had been in the Biden administration working on climate change issues. And so just really incredible fellows who offer their kind of unique experience, show students that there are different pathways, right, to a career in environmental law, and then have kind of gone off. So Sam now runs a clinic at Utah, University of Utah Law School, right? Rob's at Northwestern. Sean is at Environmental Law and Policy Center. And so again, kind of great pathways, right? Again, for younger, earlier in career folks as
Yeah.
well.
No, it's cool to.
And I was just gonna say, in terms of like numbers, like now we're at almost 30 students,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
we have added a practicum with the undergraduates, so that we have a handful of undergraduates supporting our work as well to help introduce them to this practice. And I end up writing many letters of recommendation for them applying to law schools because they all want to do environmental
Sure.
work
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah. No, it's cool that you've found this model to both scale your work so you have more students in our building, but then you're like sending out these people in the world that you've taught this model of the kind of litigation you can do with students and that they're setting up their own clinics and carrying on the work. All right, last question, and then I'm going to take some Q&A, of which we've already got a handful of questions, but please feel free to add more, anyone who's listening. Here's the last thing I wanted to ask you about. I said at the jump that the university has made two major strategic priorities, being a leader in AI and then being a leader in climate change and sustainable growth, and that you're sort of unique in that you are not just for our law school, but for the university overall, like the center of the Venn diagram, and that you're involved in both of these two major strategic initiatives. Could you say just a little bit about how AI is impacting either your work or your teaching, your strategy, or how it relates to what you've been up to on it?
Yes, and I will not take another half hour to do that because I could easily talk about that as well. So maybe I'll just hit a couple of highlights as well. So I think, on the kind of maybe the substantive piece, right? Data centers are coming. If you talk to people who, not even the AI pilled people, right? It is clear that we are going to be massively scaling data centers. And I think it has a number of impacts, which is like back to this one utility, right? So DTE is adding one data center. It's going to be equivalent to 40%, not 4, not 14, 40% of their current load, right? That is enormous, right? So that actually carries enormous risks for the company. It carries enormous risks for ratepayers, for the state of Michigan. It also can a huge opportunity, right? Because if you actually, right, these are scale economies. And so actually, if you add data centers, you can actually drive down some of the fixed costs, right? And so it's a very interesting and exciting time. They're also fundamental, essentially land use. I mean, back to ports, right? Are these placed in an area that they're not causing a nuisance, right? We read these kind of horror stories, and some of them are legitimately horrific situations where massive facilities placed right next to, within, dozens of feet, whatever, of someone's home. Back to law principles, right? I mean, is this and zoning and things like that? We need to develop new and better approaches so that as these are coming, like other kinds of uses, right, they're kind of in the right kinds of places. So again, really important issues, economic issues, risk issues, and then kind of land use and zoning. So that's one thing we're working on. I'm also on the law school's AI committee, and thinking a lot about I don't know, the opportunities and challenges of AI. Uh, One of the things I think we talk about is using AI as a coach, and using it to help people, but you also need to be able to kind of do the work originally as well, right? So once you've mastered the skill, then it can make sense to have AI speed up the work. But I think, right, if you think of AI as a form of a legal assistant in terms of doing legal work, I'm still responsible for supervising the legal assistant. I can supervise the legal assistant because I know what the output needs to look like, right? I can supervise students, I can supervise junior attorneys because I know what uh, you know what it means to read all the cases, what a good legal argument is, how you structure that argument, being honest to the sources. I know that because I've done that. And so while AI can help people with some of this, they need to have the fundamental skills and ability to actually supervise the tools. So this is kind of where we're seeing the challenge. I think there can be a opportunity and challenge. Just maybe circling back to environmental justice and maybe kind of leveling the playing field more generally. Having worked in government, I actually believe a lot in government transparency. I think that there's kind of faux transparency right now. Information is thrown up on websites, not easily digestible, not clear how you get that. If you actually have good AI tools available to members of the public, they will be able to access that information, hold government accountable, hold these regulated industries more accountable as well. So again, that's kind of the promise for environmental justice communities and kind of citizens writ large.
Got it. Great. Okay, I have follow-ups I could ask, but I'm going to instead jump to some of the Q&A that we've had come in from some of the people that have joined us. So the first question relates back to right at the start of our conversation. You mentioned that there was a plant in Michigan that was on the verge of shutting down, and then the Trump administration issued an order that extended the life of that plant. The specific question is whether or not there's any challenges that are underway to that order, to the continuing operation of the plant. And then maybe the more general version of it is, it seems, my understanding is a general phenomenon is that there's a range of, wind, solar, renewables that were ready to go online that the administration is trying to affirmatively stop and trying to arrest this transition to away from coal and towards renewables. Is first, what's happening in Michigan, and two, is that a fair understanding of the state of play?
Yes, there are challenges to this. One of our clients, Urban Core Collective in Grand Rapids, which is one of the consumers' territories, right? People have been challenging it, but unsuccessfully. And so I think people are trying to figure out other ways to kind of stop this, although it's been hard to do so. In terms of the broader question again is in terms of trying to accelerate the I'm sorry again, Adam, could you just restate the second question again?
Something just like, are we seeing the Trump administration doing this more broadly than just Michigan, which is something
Yes.
like stopping wind, solar,
Yes. Yes. I mean, so they announced hundreds of millions of dollars that were going to be invested in keeping coal-fired power plants running through essentially a grant program, and then impeding various development of wind resources, for example, offshore as well as onshore. And a lot of the reasons that are given are kind of national security reasons. I believe national security is important. I'm not quite sure that that's fully persuasive in these when you dig into the details of these particular cases. Some of them can kind of continuing to be litigated. So this whole set of issues basically is continuing to be litigated.
Got it. Okay. This is about the sort of mix of the kinds of power we might expect in the future, which is, do you see the energy mix inevitably moving to electric and gas being phased out across residential, commercial manufacturing? And then if so, do you have any thoughts on the timeline this is going to happen? And also, what do you think about the possibility of a revival of nuclear and whether or not that's viable as a power source going forward?
Great. I get timelines. Okay. So I think the legacy system. So it's really interesting. I mean, I think the gas system is it's a super interesting question, because I think we often think about scale economies, right? I mean, that's part of the reason you kind of have arguably a natural monopoly here, right? Is because adding each incremental person, the cost is smaller, and you kind of get these scale economies, right? The interesting issue with, I think, the gas system is, is there a way at some point where it's going to be kind of scale diseconomies? So what do I mean by that? As more and more residential customers leave the system, you've got a smaller and smaller base to spread the fixed costs over, right? Which means that it gets more, that encourages, the prices are higher, which then encourages more flight, meaning more electrification. And again, from the concern, particularly of my clients who tend to be lower income organizations representing lower income, the question is kind of who's going to be left holding the bag on the system, because lower income people are not going to have the money typically to invest in electrifying their homes. And so it's hard for, I guess I could look at a prediction market, right? Or something like that to find out I mean, I think over the next 3 to 4 decades, I'm also not as expert in the industrial processes. I know that there are real efforts to move away from gas on various industrial processes. So I think that's probably what would be more likely is that we were retiring the gas system. When I say the gas system, I mean kind of residential parts of it, but trying to continue to serve kind of more the industrial because of particular use cases that are hard to electrify as well. I think there's there's definitely a lot of interest in nuclear. I think that maybe I would just say generally, the environmental movement has struggled with nuclear, but again, this is one of those like trade-offs of like, we need to figure out ways to handle waste, hazardous materials, nuclear materials better because we have this huge climate imperative as well. And so I think the environmental movement many in the environmental movement are like no longer knee-jerk against nuclear. It's a question of how do we do this in a way that balances the risks and benefits correctly.
All right, so here's another question, but it's directly related, which is both you and I in this conversation have referred to the natural monopoly that exists for utility providers for the ComEds of the world. But is it really the right way to think of them as a natural monopoly? Or instead, maybe the right way to think about it is that whoever owns the power lines, the transmission lines that go into our home has a natural monopoly. Right. And instead we could deregulate and just allow more competition in the actual space for providers, which for instance, some states have done, Texas, other places. And so what do you think about deregulation and increasing the competition among the electricity generation?
I am generally in favor of that. I believe that markets lead to lower prices. And so again, this is kind of circling, whoever asked this question has some knowledge. This kind of goes back to the difference between Michigan and Illinois, which we were talking about a little bit there, Adam, at the beginning, right? Michigan is kind of integrated to an extent. I mean, you can think of it as generation, transmission, and distribution. And to try to make a long story very simple, at least in Michigan, the utilities largely own the power plants, the generation, and they own the distribution system. The transmission system has been kind of separated and owned by another entity. In Illinois, ComEd, Ameren, in the southern 2/3 of the state, they're really the distribution companies. And then you've got competition. So you've got Exelon and others like Exelon, et cetera, right? Providing a lot of the generation, right? Nuclear is very big in Illinois, so a lot of our power comes from nuclear in Illinois. And I think generally, yes, I think that I think it's a combination, right? So yes, competition, but you also want to have some kind of strategic goals kind of as well. And so you can create incentives for renewables, although honestly, the prices of renewables plus storage are now coming in so low, they're like cost competitive, whereas they may not have been 10 years ago.
Got it. All right, so we have time for one more question. And so I want to zoom out slightly with this last question. We won't have time for all of them, which is we've talked about how between data centers, the rise of AI, hopefully the world's getting less poor, which we haven't really talked about, is all going to lead to just more demand for power and electricity as we move forward, and maybe even at an exponential rate, which is going to create demand for sources, and some of which renewables are going to be unlikely to meet, or depending on the type of renewables. Given all of those constraints, what do we think environmental justice means? What is justice in this context, and how do you think about the clinic's role in offering something like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess a couple of thoughts. So there is obviously a piece which we've talked about where environmental justice and climate justice kind of go hand in hand because of the impacts of climate uh, uh, on people, and particularly people who may not have the same kind of resources to adapt, right, in the same way, or not able to mitigate as well. I think one of the other ways we think about justice in this, we kind of think about substantive justice and procedural justice. So one of the things that we have done is we have brought community voices into these fora that have not been there before, right? So we were the first people to bring in, again, represent these in Michigan, to represent these community-based organizations and bring in literally the lived, as testimony, the lived experience of particular ratepayers, which gives them voice in front of the decision makers and in front of the utility, right? They are no longer anonymous hundreds of thousands of people or millions of customers. Here's what certain decisions actually have on people. And so, the belief is that kind of some procedural justice around this will lead to some substantive justice in terms of thinking about impact of climate, again, affordability, reliability on people as well. I mean, I mean, I have the greatest job, right? I mean, I get to work with amazing students on two of the biggest issues, right? What are we going to do with AI and its impact on the environment? And more generally, what are we going to deal with climate change? And these are, someone was looking for like the silver bullet answer. I'm sorry, there are no silver bullets. Welcome to the University of Chicago, right? It's trade-offs, it's struggle, it's grappling with these issues. And I, again, feel super lucky to have the best young lawyer minds in the country to work on these issues with.
Yeah, it is tough where, two of the core things we need are more electricity and less carbon, and that these things are linked.
Great. Well, thank you both again, Dean Chilton and Professor Templeton, for sharing your time and insights with us today. And thank everyone who joined us virtually. We hoped you enjoyed learning more about the impactful work of the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic, and we're grateful for your continued support and engagement of the law school. Have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at a future law school event soon.
Thanks, everyone.